1964 was not merely a year in cinema. It was a quiet revolution unfolding in shadows and light. Across continents, filmmakers were reshaping storytelling with bold psychological depth and visual daring. Studios gambled on unconventional narratives while auteurs challenged censorship and tradition. Audiences were confronted with desire, alienation, greed, survival, and moral reckoning. Black and white frames became existential battlegrounds. Comedy sharpened into satire. Romance evolved into psychological warfare. And somewhere in the shifting sands of world cinema, 10 extraordinary films emerged, waiting to be rediscovered. Bedtime Story, 1964. In Bedtime Story, seduction is not romantic. It is strategic, repetitive, and carefully engineered like a commercial transaction disguised as charm, unfolding on the sun-drenched French Riviera where every glance feels like it has already been priced and negotiated. Directed by Ralph Levy, the film stars Marlon Brando as Lawrence Jameson, an elegant con artist who specializes in defrauding wealthy women by posing as a displaced European prince, and David Niven as the refined but equally deceptive Freddie Benson, a rival swindler whose crude methods clash with Jameson's polished sophistication. Their rivalry becomes the engine of the narrative, escalating from mutual interference into a high-stakes competition where the prize is not merely money but dominance over illusion itself. The arrival of Janet Walker, portrayed by Shirley Jones, introduces unpredictability into their carefully structured schemes, as she becomes both target and disruptor in a game where emotional sincerity threatens to dismantle professional deception. Cinematography by Joseph Lachelle bathes the Riviera in bright, almost artificial sunlight, turning luxury hotels, casinos, and coastal villas into theatrical spaces where identity is constantly performed rather than lived. Brando's performance is particularly notable for its restrained comedic timing, a departure from his more intense dramatic roles, as he constructs Jameson as a man who has built his entire existence on controlled performance and emotional detachment. Niven, meanwhile, brings effortless sophistication and dry wit, embodying a different species of con artistry rooted in charm rather than intimidation. Behind the scenes, the production marked a transitional moment in Hollywood comedy, as studios began experimenting with more adult-oriented humor and morally ambiguous protagonists, reflecting changing audience expectations in the early 1960s. The screenplay, shaped through multiple rewrites, emphasizes verbal sparring and psychological manipulation over physical comedy, creating a narrative rhythm that feels closer to chess than farce. Composer Frederick Hollander provides a score that oscillates between playful elegance and ironic undertones, reinforcing the film's central tension between appearance and truth. Upon release, Bedtime Story received mixed to positive reviews, with critics praising the performances of Brando and Niven while noting that its remake potential would eventually overshadow its original identity. Commercially, it performed well enough to inspire its later and more famous remake, Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, cementing its narrative structure as a template for con artist comedy. Over time, the film has gained appreciation for its understated satire of wealth, desire, and performative identity, suggesting that social interaction itself can be understood as a series of mutually agreed illusions. Its legacy lies not in spectacle but in tone, quietly exposing how easily authenticity dissolves when everything, including love, can be convincingly staged. What a Way to Go! 1964. What a Way to Go! Unfolds like a fever dream of wealth, romance, and absurd excess, where love itself becomes a dangerous commodity that repeatedly destroys the lives it promises to enrich. Directed by J. Lee Thompson, the film follows Louisa May Foster, played with luminous comedic precision by Shirley MacLaine, a woman who marries multiple men in succession, each one rising from modest beginnings to extraordinary wealth before dying tragically in increasingly surreal circumstances, leaving her both fabulously rich and emotionally hollow. The narrative structure is deliberately fragmented, as Louisa recounts her life to a psychiatrist portrayed by Robert Mitchum, whose calm, analytical presence contrasts sharply with the chaotic parade of romantic catastrophes. Each husband represents a different manifestation of ambition, artistic obsession, industrial capitalism, financial greed, and existential disillusionment, turning the film into a satirical chronicle of American success mythology. Cinematography by Leon Shamroe embraces extravagant Technicolor opulence, with set designs that shift stylistically between eras and emotional tones, almost like moving through different cinematic universes within a single narrative. The production was one of 20th Century Fox's most ambitious comedies of the period, featuring elaborate set pieces that parody different film genres, including silent cinema, musical spectacle, and modernist abstraction. Behind the scenes, MacLaine reportedly endured demanding costume changes and physically exhausting sequences that required rapid tonal shifts, reinforcing her character's emotional fragmentation. The musical score by Nelson Riddle enhances the film's satirical rhythm, oscillating between romantic lushness and ironic exaggeration, underlining the absurdity of wealth accumulation as emotional fulfillment. Upon release, the film was praised for its visual inventiveness and MacLaine's performance, though some critics found its episodic structure uneven and its satire overly broad. Despite this, it performed solidly at the box office and earned multiple Academy Award nominations, particularly for production design and costume design, reflecting its lavish aesthetic ambition. The film also stands as a commentary on the American dream during the 1960s, questioning whether success is an accumulation of achievement or simply a repetition of loss disguised as progress. Each husband's rise and fall becomes a metaphor for the instability of identity in a society obsessed with reinvention. Over time, What a Way to Go has gained appreciation as a bold stylistic experiment that blends dark comedy with visual excess, anticipating later films that would deconstruct romantic and capitalist ideals through satire. Its legacy endures as a dazzling critique of consumption, where love, ambition, and mortality collide in a cycle of glittering destruction that never quite resolves. Marriage Italian Style, 1964. In Marriage Italian Style, love is never gentle. It is negotiated, withheld, weaponized, and repeatedly reborn across decades of emotional warfare, unfolding within a world where passion is inseparable from survival and identity itself becomes a performance shaped by social expectation. Directed by the master of Italian neorealism and human comedy Vittorio De Sica, the film reunites him with two of cinema's most magnetic performers, Sophia Loren and Marcello Mastroianni, in a story that traces the turbulent, decades-long relationship between Filumena Marturano and Domenico Soriano, beginning in wartime Naples and stretching into the modern industrial age of post-war Italy. Loren's Filumena is introduced in a brothel environment shaped by economic necessity and emotional resilience, yet her presence immediately dominates the frame with a force that transcends circumstance, while Mastroianni's Domenico embodies privileged detachment, a man who treats affection as temporary entertainment rather than emotional commitment. The narrative evolves through a series of temporal shifts that reveal their shared history, moments of intimacy, abandonment, reunion, and deception, all layered into a psychological tapestry where love is less a feeling than a contested territory. Cinematographer Roberto Girardi captures Naples with a blend of realism and romantic decay, using light and shadow to emphasize both the vibrancy and fragility of working-class life, while interiors become increasingly claustrophobic as emotional entanglements tighten over time. Loren's performance is widely regarded as one of the defining achievements of her career, culminating in an Academy Award nomination, as she navigates Filumena's transformation from marginalized survivalist to strategic architect of her own destiny, particularly in her attempt to secure legitimacy for her children through marriage. Mastroianni's performance, meanwhile, subtly shifts from arrogance to vulnerability, revealing a man gradually stripped of emotional control by the very woman he once underestimated. The film's production faced adaptation challenges from its theatrical origins in Eduardo de Filippo's play Filumena Marturano, requiring De Sica to expand its spatial and temporal dimensions while preserving its intense emotional core. Composer Armando Trovajoli enhances the emotional landscape with a score that oscillates between romantic nostalgia and melancholic inevitability, reinforcing the idea that memory itself is a battleground between truth and desire. Upon release, the film achieved both critical acclaim and commercial success, earning multiple Academy Award nominations, including Best Foreign Language Film, and cementing Loren and Mastriani as an iconic screen pairing. However, it also sparked discussion regarding gender dynamics, as Philomena's strategic manipulation of Domenico challenges traditional romantic ideals, positioning her not as passive lover but as active architect of familial legitimacy in a patriarchal society. Over time, Marriage Italian Style has been reassessed as a profound exploration of love as economic and emotional survival, where marriage is less a romantic endpoint than a legal and psychological resolution to years of inequality. Its legacy endures as a powerful fusion of melodrama and realism, capturing the complexity of human attachment in a world where affection must often fight to be recognized as equal to dignity. Woman of the Dunes, 1964. The wind never stops moving in Woman of the Dunes, and neither does the sand. It slips through fingers, buries homes, reshapes landscapes, and slowly erases identity, creating one of the most hypnotic cinematic environments ever committed to film. Directed by Hiroshi Teshigahara and adapted from the novel by Kobo Abe, this Japanese masterpiece opens with an entomologist, played with restrained intensity by Eiji Okada, traveling to a remote coastal desert in search of rare insects, only to find himself trapped overnight in a sand pit inhabited by a mysterious widow portrayed by Kyoko Kishida. What begins as an inconvenience evolves into existential imprisonment as the protagonist discovers that escape is not simply discouraged, it is structurally impossible, because the surrounding villagers rely on him and the woman to shovel sand endlessly to prevent their homes from being swallowed. Teshigahara transforms this premise into an allegory of modern alienation, sexual tension, and the absurd futility of labor, echoing post-war anxieties in Japan while tapping into universal philosophical dread reminiscent of existential literature. The cinematography by Hiroshi Segawa is astonishingly tactile. Extreme close-ups render sand as both sensual and suffocating, clinging to skin like a living organism, while high-contrast black and white compositions evoke both documentary realism and surreal nightmare. The physical performances required immense endurance, as actors worked in real sand dunes under punishing conditions, heightening authenticity and psychological intensity. Toru Takemitsu's avant-garde score, built from eerie percussive textures and dissonant tones, enhances the film's claustrophobic rhythm, turning sound into an extension of the shifting terrain. Produced on a modest budget by the Art Theatre Guild of Japan, the film defied commercial expectations yet achieved surprising international success, earning an Academy Award nomination for Best Director and Best Foreign Language Film, and winning the Special Jury Prize at the Cannes Film Festival. Critics initially debated whether its pacing was punishing or profound, but over time it became recognized as one of the greatest Japanese films ever made, studied within academic circles for its layered symbolism concerning marriage, capitalism, gender dynamics, and existential freedom. The sexual undercurrents between captor and captive blur moral boundaries, challenging censorship norms of the era while avoiding explicit sensationalism. Its legacy endures not through spectacle but through atmosphere, a suffocating meditation on entrapment that continues to resonate in contemporary discussions about societal roles and individual autonomy. In an era dominated by studio gloss, Woman of the Dunes stood as austere proof that cinema could be philosophical, sensual, and devastatingly intimate all at once. The Pawnbroker, 1964. The streets of Harlem pulse with muted despair in The Pawnbroker, where survival is transactional and memory is an open wound that refuses to close. Directed by Sidney Lumet, this groundbreaking American drama centers on Sol Nazerman, portrayed with harrowing restraint by Rod Steiger, a Holocaust survivor who now operates a pawnshop in a crime-ridden neighborhood, emotionally detached from both his customers and his own buried trauma. Lumet situates the narrative within post-war urban America, yet the film's true geography is psychological, navigating flashbacks of Nazi concentration camps that intrude upon the present without warning, using fragmented editing and stark visual contrasts to collapse time and space. Cinematographer Boris Kaufman employs documentary-style realism, capturing Harlem's vibrancy and hardship while framing Steiger's face in severe close-ups that reveal the character's internal torment more powerfully than dialogue ever could. The film's editing structure was revolutionary for its time, juxtaposing horrific Holocaust imagery with contemporary moral compromises, forcing audiences to confront the continuity of suffering rather than compartmentalizing it. Steiger immersed himself deeply into the role, studying survivor testimonies and adopting a controlled physical stiffness that communicates emotional paralysis. His performance earned an Academy Award nomination and remains one of the most psychologically rigorous portrayals of trauma in American cinema. The production faced significant censorship challenges, particularly regarding brief nudity in flashback sequences, which contributed to the eventual dismantling of the restrictive production code and paved the way for the rating system that followed. Composer Quincy Jones crafted a restrained yet haunting jazz-inflected score that underscores the tension between modern urban rhythm and haunting memory. Produced on a relatively modest budget, the film achieved critical acclaim and solid box office performance, especially considering its uncompromising subject matter, and it earned multiple Academy Award nominations. Upon release, it divided audiences. Some found its portrayal of post-war despair unsettling, while others praised its honesty and moral courage. In hindsight, The Pawnbroker stands as a pivotal work in American cinema, bridging classical Hollywood storytelling with the emerging realism of the late 1960s. Its exploration of trauma, capitalism, racial tension, and spiritual numbness continues to resonate in modern discourse about generational pain and moral responsibility. Lumet's direction refuses melodrama, instead presenting suffering as an unadorned fact of existence, which makes the film's emotional crescendos feel devastatingly earned. More than a character study, it is an indictment of indifference, a reminder that the past is never buried, only pawned, and always redeemable at a terrible cost. Kiss Me, Stupid, 1964. Las Vegas glows like a synthetic dream in Kiss Me, Stupid, where desire, ambition, and deception collide under the artificial shimmer of neon lights, creating one of the most controversial and misunderstood comedies in American cinema. Directed by the legendary Billy Wilder, the film unfolds in the desert town of Climax, Nevada, where a struggling songwriting duo schemes to sell their music to a famous crooner by orchestrating a bizarre seduction plot involving a local woman known as Polly, played by Kim Novak. The two musicians, played with neurotic desperation by Dean Martin-type charm in its satirical echo through Ray Walston and Felix Halpern, embody the anxious ego of artists clinging to fading relevance in an industry driven by illusion. Wilder structures the film as a moral farce, where every character is performing a version of themselves, and authenticity becomes the most valuable yet unattainable currency. The cinematography by Joseph Lachelle exaggerates the artificiality of the desert town, framing interiors like theatrical sets and bathing exteriors in an almost mocking brightness, reinforcing the idea that nothing in this world is genuine, not even emotion. Behind the scenes, the production was notoriously turbulent. The script faced heavy interference from the Production Code Administration, which objected to its sexual innuendo and perceived moral ambiguity, forcing Wilder to alter key sequences and dilute certain thematic edges, a compromise he openly criticized in later years. Novak's performance carries a fragile tension between innocence and manipulation, turning her character into both subject and symbol of male projection, while the male leads spiral into increasingly absurd moral compromises. The film's music industry satire also reflects real-world anxieties of 1960s Hollywood, where songwriting and performance were rapidly industrializing, stripping artistry of intimacy. Composer André Previn contributes a score that oscillates between romantic parody and melancholic undertones, reinforcing the emotional instability beneath the comedic surface. Upon release, the film was met with harsh critical backlash, labeled vulgar and distasteful by segments of the press, and it performed modestly at the box office, largely due to controversy overshadowing its comedic intent. However, modern reassessment has reframed it as a bold transitional work in Wilder's filmography, bridging classic Hollywood wit with the emerging sexual frankness of New Hollywood. Its legacy lies in its refusal to sanitize ambition or desire, exposing the uncomfortable mechanics of persuasion, performance, and commodification in both art and relationships. Today, Kiss Me, Stupid stands as a daring, imperfect artifact of a shifting cinematic landscape, where comedy begins to shed innocence and embrace uncomfortable truth. Send Me No Flowers, 1964. Domestic life in Send Me No Flowers begins not with chaos, but with suspicion, a quiet psychological unraveling disguised as suburban comfort, where the fear of death becomes indistinguishable from the fear of emotional neglect. Directed by Norman Jewison in one of his early Hollywood features, the film stars Rock Hudson as George Kimball, a hypochondriac husband who mistakenly believes he is dying after misinterpreting a medical diagnosis, prompting him to attempt arranging his wife's future happiness before his imagined demise. His wife, Judy, played by Doris Day, becomes the emotional anchor of the film, navigating comedic misunderstandings with a blend of warmth and restrained exasperation, while their neighbor Arnold, portrayed by Tony Randall, becomes an unwitting participant in George's increasingly absurd romantic scheming. The narrative structure is built on escalating miscommunication, where every attempt at honesty produces further confusion, transforming ordinary domestic spaces into arenas of psychological comedy. Cinematographically, the film embraces the polished aesthetic of early 1960s Technicolor Hollywood, with bright, meticulously composed suburban interiors that contrast sharply with the emotional paranoia unfolding within them. Production-wise, the film was part of the successful Rock Hudson-Doris Day collaboration cycle, designed to capitalize on their established romantic comedy chemistry, yet this installment subtly darkens the formula by introducing existential anxiety beneath the humor. Hudson's performance gains retrospective poignancy, as his portrayal of concealed fear and identity performance would later be reinterpreted through the lens of his real-life private struggles, adding unintended emotional depth to the role. The score, composed by Frank Duvall, leans into light orchestral motifs that mask underlying tension, reinforcing the film's duality between comedic surface and emotional fragility. Upon release, Send Me No Flowers performed strongly at the box office, benefiting from the popularity of its stars and the comfort of its genre, and it was generally well received by audiences, though critics viewed it as less innovative compared to earlier entries in the trilogy. However, its cultural significance lies in its subtle critique of communication breakdown within marriage, revealing how love often operates through assumption rather than clarity. The production also reflects the studio system's transition period, where formulaic romantic comedies were beginning to incorporate more psychologically aware writing. Over time, the film has been reassessed as a transitional piece in American romantic comedy, bridging the optimism of 1950s domestic narratives with the more introspective relationship dynamics that would emerge later in the decade. Its humor, rooted in mortality anxiety and emotional misinterpretation, gives it a strange timelessness, as it quietly suggests that the greatest misunderstandings are not about death itself, but about how little we truly say to the people closest to us. Dear Heart, 1964. Dear Heart opens in the quiet emotional spaces between strangers, where loneliness is not dramatic but gently persistent, shaping every interaction like an invisible current beneath polite conversation. Directed by Delbert Mann, the film follows Evie Jackson, portrayed with understated emotional nuance by Geraldine Page, a small-town postmistress attending a convention in New York City where she encounters a reserved hotel executive, played by Glenn Ford, whose carefully structured life conceals profound emotional isolation. Their relationship develops not through conventional romantic escalation, but through hesitant conversations, awkward silences, and shared vulnerability, creating a portrait of adult intimacy defined by restraint rather than passion. The film's narrative is built on emotional realism, reflecting the emerging sensibilities of early 1960s American drama, where character psychology began to take precedence over plot mechanics. Cinematographer Russell Harlan captures New York not as a glamorous backdrop but as a functioning emotional landscape, filled with hotel corridors, conference rooms, and quiet street corners that mirror the characters' internal disconnection. The production, adapted from a Broadway play, retains its theatrical roots but softens them through cinematic pacing and naturalistic performances. The musical score by Henry Mancini plays a crucial emotional role, particularly its Oscar-nominated title theme, which became iconic for its gentle melancholy and understated romanticism, reinforcing the film's tone of hesitant hope. Behind the scenes, the production benefited from careful direction aimed at balancing comedy and emotional sincerity, with Mann known for his sensitivity in adapting stage material for film audiences. Page's performance, in particular, was widely praised for its authenticity, earning her an Academy Award nomination, while Ford's restrained portrayal of emotional guardedness provided a compelling counterpoint. Upon release, Dear Heart was received warmly by critics and audiences, praised for its mature handling of loneliness and human connection in an era often dominated by more conventional romantic narratives. It did not rely on spectacle or dramatic twists, instead finding meaning in emotional stillness and the quiet courage required to open oneself to another person. Over time, the film has been recognized as an early example of American cinema's shift toward introspective romantic storytelling, anticipating later works that would explore emotional vulnerability with greater complexity. Its legacy lies in its refusal to idealize love, presenting instead a version of connection that is fragile, uncertain, and deeply human. In its soft-spoken way, Dear Heart suggests that the most significant relationships are not those that change the world, but those that gently change the people within it. Top Copy, 1964. Top Copy opens not with action, but with shimmering temptation, gold, silence, and the illusion of perfection inside a world built on precision theft and aesthetic obsession, where every movement is choreographed like a ballet of risk and deception. Directed by the stylish craftsman Jules Dassin, the film assembles an international ensemble led by Melina Mercouri as Elizabeth Lipp, a charismatic master thief whose ambition revolves around stealing a jeweled dagger from the Topkapi Palace Museum in Istanbul, a plan so audacious it requires the recruitment of an unlikely team of specialists, including the nervous but brilliant safecracker Walter Harper, played by Peter Ustinov. Unlike traditional heist narratives driven by brute tension, Topkapi thrives on elegant suspense and ironic humor, allowing Dassin to transform criminal activity into a theatrical performance of intelligence, coordination, and psychological misdirection. The film's structure unfolds gradually as the team studies the museum's security systems, rehearses timing with obsessive precision, and executes a plan that depends entirely on silence, trust, and microscopic coordination, particularly during its legendary slow-motion robbery sequence, where every gesture becomes monumental in its delicacy. Cinematographer Henri Elkin crafts a visual language that contrasts the opulence of Istanbul's architecture with the hidden vulnerability of human error, using wide compositions and controlled camera movement to heighten suspense without relying on rapid editing. Ustinov's performance earned him an Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor, as he transforms Walter Harper into a neurotic, reluctant participant whose anxiety becomes both comedic relief and emotional anchor, while Mercouri radiates commanding intelligence, blending charm and ruthlessness in equal measure. The production itself was notable for its international collaboration, reflecting Dassin's own expatriate career after being blacklisted in Hollywood, which influenced the film's cosmopolitan tone and thematic focus on outsiders operating within rigid systems. Composer Manos Hatzidakis contributes a score infused with Mediterranean motifs and playful tension, reinforcing the film's balance between lightness and danger. Upon release, Topkapi was a commercial success and received widespread critical acclaim, earning multiple Academy Award nominations and winning Best Supporting Actor, while also being praised for redefining the heist genre with sophistication rather than violence. However, its influence extends far beyond awards, as it established narrative and stylistic conventions that would later inspire countless caper films, including those emphasizing ensemble coordination and elaborate theft mechanics. Over time, it has been recognized as a foundational work in the evolution of intelligent crime cinema, where the thrill lies not in destruction but in perfection of execution. Its legacy endures as a celebration of precision, trust, and the fragile beauty of human collaboration under pressure, where even the smallest misstep can collapse an entire architectural illusion of control. The Chalk Garden, 1964. The Chalk Garden unfolds like a psychological riddle hidden inside a country estate where every flowerbed seems to conceal a secret and every conversation feels like a test of perception, morality, and memory. Directed by Ronald Neame, the film adapts the play by Enid Bagnold into a richly atmospheric drama centered on a troubled adolescent girl, Laurel, portrayed with eerie intensity by Hayley Mills, whose behavioral instability leads her guardians to hire a mysterious governess, Miss Madrigal, played by Deborah Kerr. The estate itself becomes a symbolic landscape, particularly its barren chalk garden, where nothing grows naturally, mirroring the emotional sterility and hidden trauma of its inhabitants. Kerr's Madrigal arrives as an enigmatic figure whose calm authority immediately unsettles the household's rigid order, while Mill's Laurel embodies suppressed emotional volatility, oscillating between vulnerability and manipulation in ways that keep both characters and audience in psychological uncertainty. Cinematography by Oswald Morris emphasizes texture and contrast, using muted palettes and controlled framing to reflect the tension between outward decorum and internal disorder. The film's structure gradually reveals layers of deception, particularly surrounding Madrigal's past, which challenges assumptions about identity, respectability, and truth within upper-class British society. Kerr delivers a performance defined by precision and emotional restraint, gradually revealing depth beneath composure, while Mills channels youthful unpredictability into a portrayal that resists easy categorization as either victim or antagonist. Behind the scenes, the production benefited from its theatrical origins, allowing Neame to preserve the play's psychological intensity while expanding its visual and spatial dimensions through cinematic techniques. Composer Benjamin Frankel contributes a restrained, subtly unsettling score that enhances the film's atmosphere of quiet psychological tension rather than overt drama. Upon release, The Chalk Garden received critical attention for its performances and atmospheric direction, though its subtle pacing limited its commercial impact compared to more conventional dramas of the period. Nevertheless, it earned an Academy Award nomination for Kerr and was praised for its intelligent adaptation of complex source material. The film's cultural significance lies in its exploration of identity construction within rigid social structures, where truth is not simply hidden but carefully curated to maintain emotional equilibrium. Over time, it has been reassessed as an understated psychological drama that anticipates later British character studies focused on trauma, repression, and social performance. Its legacy endures in its refusal to offer clear moral resolution, instead presenting human behavior as layered, ambiguous, and perpetually influenced by unseen histories that shape every gesture and silence. 10 films, yet only one truth echoes through them all. Cinema in 1964 was learning how to breathe differently. From buried sands to glittering heists, from haunted cities to fragile bedrooms, human desire was rewritten in every frame. These stories did not simply entertain, they exposed the architecture of longing, fear, and ambition beneath modern life. Every character carried a private war, even when the world around them insisted on laughter, romance, or order. What remains today is not nostalgia, but resonance, images that still feel unfinished, still alive, still questioning us back. Because great cinema does not end when the credits roll, it lingers, reshaping how we see ourselves in silence. And 1964, quietly but permanently, proved that the most powerful films are the ones that refuse to let go. If these stories stayed with you, then the journey is not over. It has only just begun.